Hey guys, thanks for coming out. Today's panel will be titled The Euro and Bitcoin. We're going to be talking about the European Union, the Euro currency bloc. I'm here with 4 native Europeans as an American myself. My name is Dylan LeClair. I'm here with Mark, Alf, and Willem. If you guys just want to go down the line, introduce yourself, tell the audience a little bit about your Bitcoin story and how you got here.
Yeah, my name is Marc Friedrich from Germany, and I discovered Bitcoin in 2013. Actually, I got introduced to Bitcoin in 2011, but I thought it's a scam. Yeah, and then I read the white paper in 2013, and I just discovered it as the solution for a lot of problems. I woke up my wife at 3 o'clock at night and told her I found the perfect system, the perfect monetary system, and she just told me, shut up, or I got a divorce. And since then, I'm in the Bitcoin space. I'm a German best-selling author. I wrote 6 best-selling books in Germany. The last one was the most successful book in Germany, 2021. I also founded a German mutual fund, which is backed with real assets, gold, silver. There's also some Bitcoin in it. And I've got a really big YouTube channel. You can follow it, of course. You can follow me on Twitter. And I'm looking forward for this discussion with my dear friends, Mark, Alf, and Willem, of course, and Dylan. Yeah. And exciting times we're living. And yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Thanks.
My name is Marc Friedrich. Chijs. I also got into Bitcoin in 2013. Actually found out about it in 2011. Was too busy at that point with a company I took public that year, Tudo, which was a large online video site in China. 2013, I sort of retired and got into Bitcoin because of the Cyprus banking crisis, where I had a company that suddenly lost its bank account, or where the bank account was frozen. Over the past decades, I started a number of Bitcoin companies, or Bitcoin-related companies. Among others, I co-founded Hut8 Mining, which is a publicly listed Bitcoin mining company. Started a company called First Coin, which was sort of an ICO investment bank. We sold it to Mike Novogratz, Galaxy Digital. Started a Bitcoin fund that's now listed on the TSX, QBTC. Started a crypto investment fund called First Block Capital. That's still private. And actually, since about a year, I'm focused mostly on carbon credits, which I think is the new Bitcoin in terms of what's going to happen there for surprise. But that's for a different audience, probably.
Hi everybody, Alf speaking. Strong Italian accent, so get used to it. Can't do much about it. I'm from Italy, partially live here in the Netherlands. Used to run $20 billion for ING Bank here in the Netherlands. Quit banking, moved to start my own company. It's called the Macro Compass. The idea is to basically bring everything I learned to you guys. It's all free at the moment if you want to check it out. And I just hope we have a nice discussion on how the euro and different currencies interact with digital assets right here.
My name is Willem Middelkoop. I'm the author of The Big Reset, The War on Gold and the Financial Endgame. And actually, I wrote in 2014 in the Dutch edition of The Big Reset that I consider Bitcoin digital gold. But since I owned a lot of gold and silver myself, I thought I don't need it. I corrected that mistake and bought quite a bit in 2018. I'm also the founder of Amsterdam Gold. That's a bullion web shop, which I sold in 2011. And I'm also the founder of the Commodity Discovery Fund. And I still consider myself a journalist. I've been a journalist for 20 years, but now I moved over to the dark side, making money.
I would assume that most people here are European, are familiar with the euro. Maybe just for a little bit of a backdrop, how did the euro currency come about? And then maybe we can riff on how it's different from other sovereign currencies like the dollar, the yen, with multiple nations in the European Union. Mark, if you want to start.
Yeah. In the beginning, I'm a big critic of the euro because I think it's a monetary experiment which will fail, definitely fail, and I think we already see that it fails since 2011-12 with the crisis in Greece. But the idea was behind the Bitcoin to bring Europe together. And right now we have 19 different economies, 19 different countries which have the euro as a currency. And we have weak countries or economies like Greece or Spain or Italy, sorry Alf, and we have strong economies like the Netherlands, of course, and Germany. And it's actually an insane idea to put all these different economies, these different countries in one basket, in one currency, and we see the outcome right now. It's tumbling actually, and it's a historical and unique monetary experiment which will fail, because actually Greece needs a different interest rate than Germany, for example. And right now we just have a transfer union, so the Germans, the Dutch people finance the south of Europe, and it's just a matter of time till it will implode. But the idea was to bring Europe together, which is a fine idea. I like it, I like to travel around Europe with one currency, with one passport and no borders and everything. But this changed in the last couple of days, or years, with COVID and everything, of course. But anyhow, the idea was to diminish actually the German mark, because it was really strong. And I think the French people or the French government tried to get rid of the German marks, which was too strong for them, and to control Germany. But I think, Willem, you have the same opinion, or what's your take on this?
Yeah. It's a bit more complicated, because actually it was a political trade-off, because we had the German reunification, and then the French, they were afraid that Germany would become too strong and too important within Europe. So then the French said, you can have this reunification, but then you have to agree that we'll have a common
currency,
a monetary union. So that's how the euro started. It was a trade-off.
Yeah, definitely. But you see, the euro is on the lowest price in 20 years. It's getting less and less worth against the US dollar or against gold or Bitcoin, for example. And it will fail, because if you look back in history, and I'm a student of history, and I wrote in my books already in 2012 that the euro will fail, all monetary unions failed. They never worked out, because it's impossible to bring all these different economies together. And you ask about the difference between the US dollar and the euro. The US dollar is not a monetary union, because they have different Fed districts, they can choose their own interest rates in their district, and they have one language, they have one moral code or something. But here you have 19 totally different countries with different characters, and this is why it will fail. And you see, the economies in the southern Europe area are much weaker, and they need different interest rates, they need a different central bank policy, and that's why it won't happen, it won't succeed at the end, and the US dollar will definitely be stronger and will fall as the last currency in this game.
Alf, Mark, you want to hop in?
I mean, I agree with you. I think for the US, I think because it's not a fiscal union, that's actually the biggest reason why it won't work in Europe. And I mean, I fully agree with you. The euro has no future. It's an experiment that worked for 20 years because, we didn't have this perfect storm that's hitting us right now. High inflation, high debt, a war going on, energy crisis where, shortage of energy. I don't see a way out. I'm very, very negative about it, and so I fully agree. Yeah.
May I ask the audience, who of you thinks that the euro will fail? Please raise up your hands. Yeah, that's like a communist party, 100%. Yeah, but this is the trend right now. Socialism. Wait for it. It will come to Europe. It's already here, actually. But okay, I asked Bitcoiners. So what other answer did I expect? So yeah.
Alf, in your newsletter, Macro Compasses is a great read, by the way. You touch on some of the structural differences between the European sovereigns, and you do a really good job of explaining the different interest rates for the audience that's not as tuned in. Why maybe it's debt demographics, dig into a little bit. Why does Italy, for instance, have a much higher interest rate on their sovereign debt than Germany?
Yeah. Dylan, if you allow me, I'd like to step back for a second.
Yes.
Talk about the perfect storm Mark was referring to. So if you think about Europe right now, the business model we have run for 20 years was extremely successful, and it was based on two main pillars of leverage, an economic leverage and a financial leverage. So the economic leverage was basically cheap inputs, energy costs was very cheap, and also cheap manufacturing. So we outsourced as much labor as we could to cheap places. We used very cheap energy, mostly coming from Russia, and we used this very strong leverage to produce quite a lot of manufacturing output we then exported abroad. I'm basically describing Germany. The German economic business model worked exactly like that for 20 years. Now that's leverage one. Leverage two is financial leverage. And that's not only Europe, but to be honest, any developed market right now, wherever you look at, if you sum public debt and private sector debt, you're ranging anyway between 200 and 400% of GDP. So how this works is that when we can't afford a house, we go to a bank and we ask for a mortgage. All of a sudden, we have our bank account growing in size. We can go and purchase an asset that otherwise we couldn't afford. Now, as long as interest rates on this newly created debt is low and remains low, this system keeps working. Just have a look at house prices, for example. Okay, so that's the second system of leverage. One is wealth creation, financial wealth, and the other one is true wealth, is a manufacturing leverage. Now, at the moment, both of these tiers of leverage are getting hit very hard. Energy, all of a sudden, is scarce and very expensive, and labor costs as well are becoming more expensive because supply chains aren't working. We are onshoring back again, which makes everything more expensive. So economic leverage, gone. Financial leverage, well, inflation. Mark was talking about it. And obviously, if you're a central bank and inflation is running at 8%, you don't have any room for nuances anymore. You have to make sure that it gets under control again. So you raise interest rates. Look at your mortgage rate. Used to be 2%. It's now 5%. All of a sudden, you are not financially wealthy anymore when you look at asset prices, house prices you can afford, etc., etc. So this is a complex system with two sources of leverage, and both of them are getting challenged. And what happens at that point is that the system becomes very unstable, and it's reflected in the euro, not only in the euro, by the way. Korea, same business model. Look at the Asian currencies. They're getting slaughtered. Every currency that is exposed to one of these two sources of leverage is getting slaughtered.
And British pound is even worse.
There you go.
If you look at the UK, they only have financial reserves of a good 100 billion, which is next to nothing if you have to defend your currency. And now, since Brexit, they're on their own. So I sent out a poll on Twitter last night. When will UK need IMF support? And that, no, it sounds like a joke, but it could happen within 12 months.
And they still have AAA on their treasury.
Yeah,
it's a great.
But I would like to add something, because you had a great analysis. It's the end of cheap energy, it's the end of cheap labor. It's also the end of cheap solutions, because in the last 40, 50 years, you could solve each and every crisis by just printing money. But now you have inflation, superinflation, or even on the verge of hyperinflation. PPI in Germany, 45%. And if you start to solve crisis now by putting on the printing press or subsidizing energy bills, you increase the inflation. So inflation is the only problem you can't solve by printing money. Mm-hmm. And nobody's talking about that.
Yeah, and they print money. For example, the German government, they just made a package, 200 billion euro, to help the people against inflation. Yeah. So we will see more inflation.
That's Weimar.
It's Weimar Republic 2.0. And we already see hyperinflation. If you look at the PPI, 45.8%. So we will see inflation will get higher and higher in the next couple of months in Europe and in Germany.
Or we'll have a real economic crisis.
Yeah.
So the only way to bring inflation down is by creating a real economic crisis, what they're actually trying to do now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have enough time for that. I think the energy prices are already so high, they're going to keep on going up, I think, over the next couple of months. It's going to take a long time to get more energy. We're in a situation, I think the only real solution, I think, is actually for governments to stop spending money, to literally go down in expenditures by 50, 60%. But they will never do that because nobody's going to be re-elected.
No.
There's just no other solution. So, yeah, I mean, we're fucked. Yeah.
So, buy some Bitcoin and gold.
No, the solution for the politicians is more socialism, spending more money, printing more money, and we will see also a pivot at the ECB and even at the Fed in the next months. That's for sure. Because what's the alternative? A total crash? So we see it already happening.
It's worse than socialism. You have state capitalism now.
Planned economies.
And state capitalism started in China, and state capitalism is you know, you can't have state capitalism. Capitalism is about free markets, and when the state takes over different markets, you don't have any capitalism anymore. But we've seen the success of state capitalism in China, and now in Europe, and even in the US, you see a move towards state capitalism. The state is deciding who will be supported. The state is deciding the rules of the game, and that's very troubling.
Let me ask you guys a question. So, Alf, you touched on kind of those cheap Russian inputs kind of serving as the output for German manufacturing. And Germany is kind of this, or was the economic powerhouse of the EU with a huge current account surplus. Is this maybe structural shift in globalization as a trend? Europe is coming off a decade where many of the sovereign yields, especially Germany, were in negative in nominal terms. Is the real bond bull market dead? And it's probably in real purchasing power terms 50% from the highs. What does that mean going forward if bonds are no longer this kind of hedge against equity market downturns, economic uncertainty in real terms, right? Because for the last 40 years, if we're talking about U.S. capital markets and to an extension the euro, bonds continue to increase in purchasing power. And if that regime is dead, what does that mean for investors?
So I think I need to go back to the question you asked before about demographics to answer this. So when investors invest in an asset class, digital assets included, Bitcoin included, people should always be careful about the time frame you are using and the risk management you use around this time frame. So if you talk about bonds, obviously, Dylan, right now, with central banks forced to make sure to be credible with markets, to raise interest rates in a way that they put themselves in front of the problem and act viciously to bring back inflation, the bond market temporarily has to reprice, obviously, to accommodate that intervention from a central bank. Now, long term, the story is a bit different, if you ask me, because if you take 30 years ahead of you, bonds effectively tend to reflect nominal growth over the very long term, right? So nominal growth is real growth and inflation expectations and realized inflation. Now, it's all about demographics and productivity over the medium to long term. And if you look at European demographics, whoa. I mean, we guys are pretty much growing old. Well, look at me, I'm bold. I mean, but in general, if you have a working force which doesn't grow, yesterday on Twitter, I put out a chart that shows that the estimate for labor force growth over the next 30 years, so how many people will actively contribute to economic growth, is actually supposed to be negative territory for many European economies over the next 30 years. We aren't going to get more people join the workforce. We're going to get more retirees, more people go into retirement, not enough kids to replace them over the next 20 to 30 years. So there will be less people contributing to economic growth. That's not a positive for strong potential economic growth. That doesn't work.
So that's why our politicians in Europe say we need mass migration. Mm-hmm. And that causes another problem because it doesn't seem to blend in that well. It's to come back to your question, it's the end of the monetary road. Yeah. If government bonds are the basis of every institutional portfolio. And they're down on average 25%. But if you look at the UK bonds, the gilts, they're down over 50%.
Down more than Bitcoin in dollar terms this year.
Jesus, in 12 months. Yeah. That used to be a safe investment. So
it's a shitcoin now.
Yeah. So when I wrote The Big Reset, that was written in 2013, the undertitle is the financial endgame. And you come at the end of a monetary road. That doesn't mean we'll all die, but we need a monetary reset. We need debt restructurings. We need to find a new anchor for world's monetary system, which is the dollar since 1944. Well, on average, world reserve currencies, they survive for 92 years. We're over 80 years almost for the dollar. So we need big changes. And the Chinese are aware of this, the Russians are aware of this, and the Chinese and the Russians are working together since 2015 to position themselves in the most perfect way. It's not about the Ukraine. There's this huge fight over who's controlling the international monetary system. And Saudi Arabia has a central role because Saudi Arabia always backed the dollar by the petrodollar deal. And now we see the Saudis flirting with Russia and China. So many moving parts.
Yeah, so we need to get away not just from the dollar as a currency, we need to get away from the fiat system, I think. It's a bigger thing than just which currency is going to be the leading one. I think there's going to be a paradigm shift there. We really need to think about, what will work in the future, because the system is not working. And there's not one currency that will do well over the next year, a couple of years. And, maybe that's Bitcoin, that's the title here of the panel, or maybe it's something else, but it's not the fiat system.
But we have to be aware that for at least the US will defend the Pax Americana and the US dollar. They already do it in any way, and we see it happening right now, actually. So they want to keep the world currency number one, and they will do everything for it. And we have to be aware of this, because this will cause a lot of trouble, of course. And you see it right now, the US dollar is as strong as like in the last 20 years hasn't been. And the euro is weak, the pound is weak. There are the big winners right now on this geopolitical game, actually.
I would like to warn Bitcoin investors, because Bitcoin is the best form of money. And the financial system should be Bitcoin-based, but world leaders are not going to hand over the keys of the financial system to you guys. So you have two competing alternative monetary assets. One is Bitcoin, and the other one is gold. But be aware, gold is part of the current monetary system. So central bankers will always choose to reevaluate gold and bring gold back into the system before they will even think about bringing Bitcoin into the system. And that's a big mistake many of the Bitcoiners make. They think, we'll just take over. Well, good luck.
But they will at first introduce CBDCs, of course, digital euro, digital dollar, and they just put a fiat scam in the digital level. That's
just more fiat.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys. So, Alf was making a point about demographics and about debt burdens, and I think this is personally like my Bitcoin thesis is when I look at the U.S., when I look at every government in the world and the demographics and the debt, I'm left with the conclusion that there is no option other than to kind of a decade plus of financial repression, interest rates below levels of inflation, where sovereign debt as an asset class just kind of steadily bleeds out in value. Is there any other option for the EU, for the Fed? I mean, obviously they're tightening the belt now, but if we get some sort of crisis, if we see what's happening, say in the UK gilt market with the Treasury market, or we see euro sovereign spreads blow out, is the ECB not going to step in? And I think that's the obvious answer is they will. What is a world where 200% to 400% debt to GDP with horrible demographics? What does that look like for the currency itself? Is it just printers on forever? Let me pose that to you guys.
MMT, I guess. No, we have to be aware that we will witness in the near future a macroeconomic shit show, that we see the end of the monetary system, and that we see desperate central banks all over the world. And the ECB will be one of them which will crumble. It's like the Reichsbank in Germany in 1923. And they will try to save the system for themselves, because they know if this goes down, or if this whole system goes belly up, they have a big problem. So demographics is just one of the ticking time bombs we have, but we have all this crisis from the last couple of years. It's getting more and more. We had just COVID, and it's still not really solved. There's still companies who suffer. And now we have another crisis. We have a debt crisis. We have the demographics. We have inflation. We have politicians who are not capable to find real solutions. And all this together, it's like a historic crisis, because all this crisis come together right now, and we all see it, we all feel it, and we will never be in the time before COVID. That's for sure, definitely. And the politicians have no solution. So I think we will see a total breakdown of the system, like a final capitulation. But then it's like Schumpeter said, we need this creative destroy. Yeah, to get something new, actually. And there is no solution within the system, and actually they know it, but they want to admit it so far.
Alf, if you were like Christine Lagarde, what would you do in these shoes? How do you play this? I mean, it's a job that I think no one wants.
Resign.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I get another job, please, Dylan?
Yeah.
No, but if I can't change job, there is no easy fix. I mean, as Willem already...
Is austerity an option?
As Willem already highlighted, when you have high levels of inflation, which was, in Europe, it's actually a combination of things. It's monetary support from governments and central banks, and it's supply bottlenecks, it's energy prices, it's a bunch of things. But the central bank cannot stem an energy crisis. They cannot make supply chains work better. They can't.
They can almost make it worse if they overdo
it. Yeah, if they want, they can make it worse. What they can make worse is spending power, the demand side of things. So obviously, if inflation is not driven by the demand thing, but by supply things, if you want to cool it down, you need to overdo it on the demand side, which, guys, to make it very simple, you need to raise unemployment. You need people to get out of jobs. And as they get out of jobs, they don't have spending power anymore, not in nominal, not in real terms. Therefore, they spend less, and therefore prices go down. But that's not something we should be happy about. We're talking about a recession. We're literally talking about loss of jobs. Now, obviously, a central banker doesn't want that either. But at the moment, what the central banker wants is it's just irrelevant. It's all about choosing what the least painful path ahead is. And I can't see any that looks decent, to be honest.
It's going to be super painful. If you're running a central bank or the ECB right now, you must realize yourself there's no way out. I just cannot believe that they don't see it. And so if you know there's no way out, the best way is the way of a quick lot of pain. So indeed, the great reset, as you call it, Willem.
It's the big reset, huh?
Yeah, the great reset. That's a different one.
Sorry, that's the different. The big reset.
You stole it.
Yeah, so I think that is really what you should probably aim for. A quick, painful way that's going to be over in 2-3 years, and then finding ways to get abundant energy in 2-3 years again. But we're all going to go through a very difficult period in Europe.
But they know this because when I was doing the research for the big reset, I found some papers, and there were some conferences where the East and the West, so Europe and China, were having conferences to discuss these topics. Mm-hmm. And I ended the book in the epilogue. I said, I hope the East and West can work together so we can morph into the next phase of the monetary system in the most, without too much pain. But if we get a conflict between the East and the West, we could have wars. And now we're in this war. And then you really have a problem. And if you look at the actions of the United States, they provoked Putin by subsidizing this revolution, Maidan Revolution 2014. They really provoked Putin. Well, Putin reacted, and now they're provoking China by sending Pelosi to Taiwan. It's the same strategy. It's the US strategy, building tension, hope they bite, blame them, use sanctions. But the Chinese understand, and that's why the Chinese support Putin. They don't support Putin because they think killing people in Ukraine is a great idea. They support Putin because they want to see how the US will fight Russia, because that will tell them a lot how the US wants to fight China.
So what you're saying, Willem, is actually this big reset could be a World War III.
That's the worst case scenario, which I mentioned in the book, and I'm getting afraid about that because the US understands that they need to keep in power. They need to be number one in this world. They only have 10 years left before China is more advanced and more strong, also in a militarily way, than the US. So the US needs to have a large crisis, not only with Russia, but with China, and that's what's really troubling.
But we have to definitely see that China has also very bad demographics because of the one-child policy. So in 2050, there will be only half of them around. So, but I have to shill my book as well right now. So in my last book, I explained the cycles. And if a monetary system ends, there are always revolutions or wars. And we see it already. A war is happening. Yeah. If the dollar goes and another currency will come, then we see a transformation, and we see social unrest, and we already see it. We're already on this level. Yeah. It's all about cycles. You have to understand the cycles of the monetary system, of power, and of course of the generations.
And the reset already started. Many people always ask, when will the reset start? Well, you're in it, guys.
We have to acknowledge that we're all witnessing history right now, and come on, guys. We feel it, that something is different than in the past.
And it's scary. And like you said, when you have these big changes in the world monetary order, it happens every 90 years. Almost always it happens with wars. And read The Fourth Turning, a wonderful book on this topic.
Actually, you can read my book as well, because I have a guy. No, seriously. No, I've got a summary actually of The Fourth Turning from Neil Howe in the book, and if you see all the other cycles, it just works out perfectly. If you understand the cycles, you actually can predict the future. And right now,
and you'll buy Bitcoin.
But actually, Bitcoin is the only solution we have right now. There's no other alternative.
And a bit of gold.
Okay, sound money, brother and brother, gold and Bitcoin. I agree with you, Willem.
Can any of this be solved in the interim? I mean, we can talk big picture and talk Bitcoin, sound money, gold, but in the interim, can any of this be solved without fixing the energy deficit?
Alf?
Is that
You're the banker guy.
I'm the banker.
You were with ING.
And also, I guess maybe a second part of the question, we're talking about these big cycles. It's pretty eerie to, when you look at the work of, say, Ray Dalio, talking about these short-term and long-term debt cycles. Every indication I see says, hey, we're at the end of this, long-term debt super cycle. What comes on the other side? Is it a return to sound money? Is there any other alternative? Can they keep kicking this can?
I mean, Dylan, the thing is, the system, even before the stress that it's undergoing, if the system wouldn't be leveraged, it would grow, especially in Europe, at extremely socially unacceptable low real GDP growth rate per year. Because the labor force doesn't grow and productivity trends are in the 1% area in the Eurozone, which makes real unleveraged GDP growth maybe below 1%. It's basically Japan 2.0. Japan shows the way from that perspective. But Japan is culturally very different than Europe. As Mark said before, Europe is basically a cohesion of very different cultures. It's very difficult to accept below 1% GDP forever. So what you do is you lever up the system, and we discussed about the two sources of leverage. But now we have a stress situation. Let's assume via a lot of pain we get out of it somehow, right? And we don't have a reset of any sort, right? What do you think is going to happen when we restart all over again? The demographic hasn't changed. The productivity hasn't changed. If anything, we saw that there is quite some stress embedded in the system. Well, we're just going to lever it up again, Dylan. Yeah. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So if government balance sheets are, a bit too bloated, we're going to move to the private sector side. So we're going to go and basically ask people to take on debt themselves rather than the governments, which, by the way, many countries in Europe already do in very large sizes, while other countries in Europe prefer the government balance sheet to lever up. So that's Italy, that's Greece, that's Spain. But Northern European countries in general lever up the private sector balance sheet. Look at households debt, look at corporate debt in France, for example. That is basically the leverage that allowed growth to be more socially acceptable, but it also creates a lot of fragilities. And right now, as Mark said, it's a perfect storm. Now, let's assume we get out of it. What are we going to do? How are European policymakers going to engineer growth after that? There is no magic here. It has to be, again, more of the same. And the system becomes more and more fragile every time we iterate the same process. And there is always a crisis after generally 7 to 8 years. There is some disruption. European debt crisis in 2012. In 2018, we had the stock market and the repo market in the US blowing up, and the Fed had to intervene. Now we are facing a much broader crisis, but you can see that as you lever up the system more and more, it becomes more fragile at every iteration, and there is always some pressure brewing, and you only tap the release valves, but for how long can you do that?
Is the release valve the currency?
Yeah, so right now, the UK, I think, as Willem said, it's a great example because it's not only a system that perfectly, that leveraged a lot on both sides, the economic leverage and the financial leverage, but it's also a system that is very dependent on external funding. The UK is an island. They import much more than they export. They have a financial account deficit, a current account deficit, now a fiscal deficit because these geniuses decided to actually cut taxes right now. Great. So investors are obviously saying, sorry guys, we are not going to fund you. We don't accept this anymore. If we are to fund you, to buy your bonds, to buy your currency, we demand different remuneration. So yields must be much higher, the currency level must be much lower. This is nothing different than an emerging market crisis.
Yeah.
We are not used to see it in Europe, but that's exactly what it is.
It's a banana republic crisis.
Emerging markets are often dependent on external inputs. That can be the flow of dollars. That can be energy, goods, anything. It's an emerging market, so it's building up. It needs external inputs. Well, guess what? Also, Europe and the UK need external inputs, but so far, there was never a stress. For 20 years, Germany imported roughly 20 to 30 billion of natural gas worth from Russia. That's not a large amount. It's 20 to 30 billion because it was stable and cheap. And it levered up those energy inputs to come up and produce almost 2 trillion of manufacturing value added. So as long as the system is not stressed, it works. Well, now it is stressed, and when it is, the currency gets targeted and the bond market gets targeted. And a central bank can make sure the bond market basically stays put. I mean, see Japan. These guys have not traded their government bond for 6 sessions in a row. It's not moving. It's there because the central bank has an infinite balance sheet and it says, this is the price. You want to challenge me? I can just print more of this currency and I can support that this is the price. They can do the same with the currency much less. And Willem was very right. The UK has only 1.5 months worth of imports denominated in dollars of FX reserves. So for how long do you think they're going to be able to protect the pound? They are not able to do that.
But Alf, look at the United States, because we know it's a mess in Japan. Bond markets are broken. The BOJ, the Bank of Japan, needs to support it every day. We know it's broken in the UK, same story. And we think all is fine in the US. But Janet Yellen, she warned yesterday, she's the Minister of Finance, she warned yesterday there's not enough liquidity in the US Treasury market.
She also said there'd be no financial crisis
but it's starting to break everywhere.
Yeah.
So the need for a reset type is the pressure is increasing in the system. But I think there's one way out. And central bankers have used that way out before. And that's a revaluation of gold. Bring gold back into the system.
Like almost a remonetization of gold in a way?
Yeah.
I mean, it's monetized already.
It's going back on a gold standard light. They've done the same in the 1930s during the crisis. All US persons needed to hand in their gold. That's when Fort Knox was built, and then they revalued gold by 40%. So that's a devaluation of the dollar by 40%, which is needed now because the dollar is too strong. So watch that space, and I think a revaluation of gold, devaluation of the dollar, that is what might happen next.
And the confiscation as well?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, but that's what you need probably, right? That's the problem.
No, I think it's there's how many of you have physical gold? Oh yeah, it's a Bitcoin crowd. It's a Bitcoin crowd, but on average, it's maybe 1-2%. So that's not a big problem. And don't forget, all central banks have huge official gold reserves. They don't have Bitcoin reserves. Well, El Salvador has, yeah, true. But
They say they have gold, right? That's the difference between... I don't believe they do anymore.
That doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter if you have 8,000 tons of gold in Fort Knox or you haven't. You can't prove, we can't prove the US doesn't have them. So when they revalue gold, because actually it's on the balance sheet for $40 an ounce, so if they revalue that to $4,000 an ounce, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve looks much better. Same for the ECB, but same for the Chinese, because the Chinese accumulated. So I think that's the solution which might...
Yeah, I agree with you, because since 2008, since the big financial crisis, all central banks bought gold like never before. It's crazy. They're on the shopping spree. But on the other side, I think we will see more financial depression against the citizens everywhere. Higher taxes, more repression, and then perhaps they come with the gold standard or perhaps with the gold or Bitcoin standard. We will see. But this will just give them more power for more time and will not end this crisis. So we will see MMT perhaps. We will see more packages, more debt, more inflation, more problems. You know, in a couple of years, Germany went from number one to freezing for peace, and I don't know if we still have companies left because there's a deindustrialization going on. Companies think about moving away because there's no oil or gas and there's no security in planning. It's crazy what's happening right now.
I can guarantee you won't have a Bitcoin standard before the whole system of central banking and fiat money has been tumbling down.
I agree. I totally agree.
And the toolbox of central bankers is almost empty, but they still have a few cards left. And gold revaluation is one of them. They've done that before. They'll do it again.
Yeah. Do you guys think that you mentioned the strong dollar, and it's interesting that, I think Paul Krugman the other day was like, no, Europe, or I think he was referring to the UK, it's not an emerging market debt crisis. They don't have foreign-denominated liabilities. The funny thing is that the foreign-denominated liabilities is like almost energy in a way, right, where they have to be a buyer at any price. I guess the question I'd pose is, do you think this results in a Plaza Accord 2.0? And maybe if one of you guys want to explain what the Plaza Accord is and why it came about in the 80s.
The US has, at the moment, 8.5% inflation, Dylan. They have real wages shrinking by the tune of 2 to 3% annualized, which is quite a lot. It's a loss of purchasing power of 2 to 3% annualized. They are completely freaking out on gaining control of inflation. So that means that they're going to try and sort out their domestic problems first before they help other countries. And don't forget, the strong dollar actually is, in principle, not bad for the US when it comes to importing disinflation from abroad, right? I mean, the US also is a big importer rather than a big exporter of stuff. So the thing is, the US needs to tighten the belt very aggressively, and they are already doing that, and they will do that. They will keep doing that until, what Willem said before, something very, very big breaks. And then there's going to be a need for international coordination. Now, that very big breaks used to be the repo market or the treasury market. And Willem is right, because the bond market is basically, you should think about it like the base of the pyramid for all other asset classes that are basically either priced directly on the bond market. Think of a mortgage. A mortgage is priced as a derivative of the bond yield plus a credit spread that you basically have to endure as a consumer. So the bond market is like the base of the pyramid of all financial assets on top of it. And if the base of the pyramid cracks, then you have a problem. Now, Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, is very worried about liquidity, or she used not to be worried. Now it's all of a sudden worried about that. But I can tell you from first-hand experience that in 2020, when I tried to purchase a couple of 100 million bonds for the portfolio I was managing, during the pandemic crisis, there was no offer. There was no offer. I swear, all market makers in the street told me, Alf, can't trade. Like, dude, what are you talking about? You're a market maker. You are the guy supposed to deliver liquidity for exactly this stuff. And they would tell me, yeah, but, regulation is killing us, and we have all these risk models, and we have our risk managers telling us we should not provide any liquidity to any investor. Basically, that was the situation back then. So right now, it's just a derivative of what you already saw, but these liquidity problems are brewing under the surface. Unfortunately, a Plaza Accord, which is nothing else than international cooperation when it comes to coordinating how much the dollar should be really strong against any other currency. Or weaker. Because, I mean, other currencies are a derivative of the dollar in the system we have built. This is a dollar-centric system where other jurisdictions need and trade with the dollar, even if they don't have access to the dollar itself. But in order to get there, you need a weaker dollar, which means you need the US to be willing to do so, which means you need the US to be able to solve their domestic inflation problem first, which means more pain ahead first before you can come to an agreement.
Yeah. And don't forget, every time we have an interest rate cycle, every time something breaks. It always happened. So this time, perhaps it's a bond market.
Treasury market liquidity drying up. It seems like it only leads to bad things. Is that pivot coming anytime soon, or is that just some more hopium in the interim?
I don't think it's coming anytime soon. Actually, I published an article a while ago which was called Fed Pivot My Ass. And I still stand behind that title because the incentive scheme of these guys is very clear. They need to regain control. When I talk to policymakers, to central bankers actually in conferences, when I was running money, it was always very clear, guys. At the end of the day, the incentive scheme for them is to have a controllable status quo situation where they can kind of maneuver around. And right now, it's all but that when you look at inflation going on around the world. They need to bring it back, or they will try their best to bring back the situation into a controllable fashion. This requires tightening monetary policy. This does require that. Loss of jobs, it does require that, and they will go ahead with that.
In 2000, we had the tech bubble. In 2008, we had the housing bubble and great financial crisis. You've heard people, and including myself, call 2021, 2022 the everything bubble, sovereign debt crisis. Is that what this is going to be known as after the fact, you guys think?
Yeah.
The everything bubble.
But what we haven't discussed, and the title of this panel is the Euro and Bitcoin, we haven't discussed the fight from the official sector against crypto, against Bitcoin. And I'm a bit afraid that when we reach the end of this monetary road and we reach the reset point, as I said, Bitcoin will be considered a much larger enemy for the system than gold. And you could see the last fight actually might be the fight from the fiat system against the Bitcoin system. Because the Bitcoin system is so strong and powerful, and the more strong and powerful it gets, the more oppression and the more force it will meet. And I think that there's a huge risk that once this Bitcoin community and crowd gets real excited, like we're winning, then they'll cut off all on and off ramps. And we see that already happening in the Netherlands. I know businesses who have a bank account with a Rabobank, a zakelijke account, so professional account, and they really got in trouble because they used that to mine Bitcoin. And you can cut off the on and off ramps in all G20 countries easily, or all IMF countries. And of course, you can still trade Bitcoin with your friends, and it becomes a gray currency and can go to El Salvador, but that's a real risk for Bitcoin.
I agree with you right there, Willem, but I think either the Fed will fight Bitcoin or they will embrace it.
They will never embrace it. Never.
No,
never.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think it's politically impossible now in the US to not embrace Bitcoin. There are too many Americans who own Bitcoin. You need them to vote for it for you. I disagree with you on this one.
But do you think they will allow it to be part of their official monetary reserves?
They may actually, yes. I think there are countries doing this. Singapore, for example.
US,
so,
the Federal
okay,
Reserve.
well, no. Look, the US is not stupid. I mean, they're seeing what's happening in the world.
I think the first big central bank who adopts Bitcoin will win this whole race. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. Well, finally we have a discussion.
yeah. Then we have more time. Let's go.
I think that's a good good place to end on. We're running a little over time, but appreciate everyone tuning in. Wish we could go longer.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm getting looked, but thank you.
Can I ask a big hand for Dylan? I just learned Dylan is 21 years old and he all understands this.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Magazine Live Desk at Bitcoin Amsterdam, sponsored by Bitco. I'm Natalie Brunel, and I'm so excited to be joined by two of my favorite voices in the space, Jeff Booth and Greg Foss. We just heard a panel on Bitcoin and the euro, and I really think Marc Friedrich kind of stole the show there. I was making sure that I was following him. He talked about how the EU is essentially a failed experiment. And one thing that I found interesting, too, is I'm from Poland, and I remember when I was little and we would travel across countries, every country had their own currency. It was worth something. I had this Lotte, and then there was the franc and everything, and now it's EU. What were your takes on the panel?
Yeah, I agree. I thought Mark was really great on that panel. The entire panel was a good panel. But I think what they're talking about is when people face a challenge like this and they turn inward, and cooperation is required around the world to drive higher living standards. And when people turn inwards to protect what they believe is, they turn outwards to other countries. So because of this failed experiment, or not failed experiment yet, but because of the debt required to do this, it's going to turn populations within Europe against each other. And so I think he's right. And I think Bitcoin is a beneficiary of that system.
All right, well, we just want to bring in someone real quick as a cameo before we give it to the next panel. We have a guest here, Lauren Price. I just want to bring her in real quick. Why don't you give us a couple lines on why it's important for young kids to be passionate about Bitcoin? She got into it when she was 9, and now she's 11. Why is it important to be into Bitcoin as a young kid?
Because then you can understand it better too. Because if you ask questions to a grown up, they have to explain it better. So that's also a better way on how to be a kid.
It's your future. It's the future of money.
Yeah, it's the future of the people, and it's the future of the money. So
I love that. Bitcoin is for everyone, no matter what age. And now, okay, we're running a little behind. We're getting to the next panel, which is going to be decentralization, featuring Nigel from GB News and Peter McCormick. Don't go away.